Hello everyone, it's Amy and welcome back for week 8 of Build Your Stash and Craft. Today we are going to make our own stencils. It is definitely not as hard as you may think that it could be, and there are lots of different ways that you can do it to make it even easier for you. So I'm going to give you kind of some tips and some hints and show you a few that I've already done, and then we'll do a few. So to start with, what I normally do is I take a piece of paper and I make myself a pattern. So I just used my ruler and just drew some straight lines and, then went up and down. I did these actually all very even. You don't have to do that. For my circles, I just took my pen and I just drew a bunch of circles and then I cut them out. And then again, I used a ruler to have straight lines. To draw my straight lines for this. Now, plastic rulers are not good to cut against. They're good to draw your patterns, but if you try and use your sharp knife against a plastic ruler, it will shave the edges off of your ruler. So you have to kind of do it just by hand. Once you've drawn your pattern, you really don't want to use your plastic ruler, but if you have a metal ruler or any kind of a straight metal edge, those work great if you want to put that down and run your knife along the edge of, like, I have a metal ruler here. So, this would be fine to cut against, but our plastic ruler that we have, it would get all nicked up. And, so that way when you want to draw straight lines and that type of thing, it's not the best to use your plastic ruler. And if you do, go slow and be careful trying not to shave off the edges of your ruler. So, so you can copy, if you have something that you want to, that's not what I mean. You can either, if you want to keep this for later, so that you have a reference, or you can do it again at another time, because when you cut it, your bits are going to they're going to fall out. So, which you can still use it again later. But if you want to have this for later, you can put it on your copy machine and copy it so that you've got it there, a nice fresh one, for another time. Or you can stick it like on a window and put another piece of paper on top of it and just trace around what you have so that you don't have to redo this pattern later if you want to use it again. So sometimes that is a good thing to do, or just keep your original. Because like I said, you still can, use it even if it's cut. The more that you cut on top of it, the worse your shapes are going to get. But if, you might want to keep a copy for later. The little plastic bits that come out, keep those for little embellishments and that type of thing for later too. They could be fun to play with. Don't just throw them away just because they're not part of your stencil. And and another thing is stenciling book pages is really a fun thing to do. I wrote different things down so that I wouldn't forget to talk about different things. But here we go. This is this stencil. And so we have the circles and the 3 lines at the bottom of this stencil. And we have the squares. And so that is a good way. And this actually, this is a wipe off, because after, okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. So after I do my stencils, I put a piece of paper behind it, and then I use paint or ink, and I go ahead and use my stencil so that I can have a pattern to look at when I'm trying to decide what I want to use. I'll know just what it looks like. Now you can do solid paint if you want to, but also, like you can do the solid paint, but as you're going across and you start running out of paint, sometimes that is, or really dabbing off your paint off of your sponge, the lighter bits are really nice also. And so this stencil, the squares look like this. There are circles, and see, there they are in a solid color, but then there they are as they're getting lighter. And the same thing here, we've got a solid color, and then as it's lighter. So, remember, you don't have to always fill in every bit. You don't have to make it a really solid color, because a lot of times the lighter bits look a little bit nicer anyways. Once I've done this, now if you have a 3-ring binder, you can use your hole punch, punch your holes in here, and put this in a 3-ring binder. If not, you can just put it in, excuse me, a file folder, which hopefully, you know, like most everybody would have, some kind of a box. And, you know, you cut off the top and the bottom, and there we go. We've got a file folder. So now we can take the stencil and put it in here. The problem with stencils is a lot of times they want to get stuck to each other, especially if they're very swirly or have lots of frilly bits. And you go to take it out and they're stuck and you're pulling on it, you rip them, whatever. So this is a twofold reason that we do this. Number one, so you can look at it and say, okay, that's what it looks like. I want to use this, or I want to use this on my project. Also, if you keep the paper between each stencil has its own piece of paper. So now this stencil is here. When I set my next stencil on top, I'm going to take my stencil and see how this stencil is very loose. Well, these are quite solid, so they don't get too tangled. But if you have 2 of them like this and they're next to each other, they're going to get tangled up with each other. So what you do is you take your next stencil and you put it in like that. And now you have that piece of paper between your stencils. They will not get stuck together. We have another one here that has the loose bits. These 2 in a folder next to each other would not be a good idea. They're going to get caught on each other. They're going to get tangled up with each other. You're trying to get them out. They may rip. And so that is the reason that you want to have your piece of paper in between them, so that now when you go to look at those, you just go ahead and you just flip it over and they're not going to get stuck together. So now this one here, I just went ahead and used a paper towel. There was, you know, picked the paint up off my palette and just pounced a paper towel on there. And so, and some of these, if you make them very frilly, you know, they are going to get a little bit, you know, they're going to hang down and stuff. So you have to be careful with them, and you have to hold them so that they don't move. You can also, you could put a piece of tape across a few pieces, or leave a bit of plastic to hold those parts together to kind of hold everything in place. The only thing is then you don't get your paint in that area and you have to go back and try and maybe fill it in. So, but that is one great way, is you can see what they look like. Here is this one. This one was cut with a knife. This was cut freehand with a pair of scissors with no pattern whatsoever. This one I drew a pattern and then I went ahead and cut it out with the X-Acto knife. So, you know, you can do it in different ways. This is using the hole punch and this is using our hole punch. But the way to get a larger area to cover, because your hole punch only, where is the hole punch? It was here. Your hole punch only reaches so far. So when you're trying to punch on here, it will only go this far. So you can either only make just circles up here, but if you want more area, I just used my scissors and just cut a straight line there. What I did was I held this up and went, okay, my hole punch will come to here. Now, if I go ahead and start punching, look at where, you know, how far your plastic will go. So I held that up to where it would go, and then I cut a line right where it would come this way, so that I could come in from this side and that side, not have a big gap in the middle, and then I just very randomly punched these. If you see people use punchinella is not quite as random, but they'll move it around so it's more random. So it's great to have random, and it's nice to have. Then I just went ahead, I sliced it here also, and I just took my hole punch, put it all the way up till it hit the neck of the hole punch, and just went ahead and then punched it so that they were all pretty much in a line, because every time I made sure that I put my plastic all the way to this little neck right here so it wouldn't go any further, and then I punched it. So now I have a nice straight line. And, you know, so that is how you can make a larger area if you've got a punch. Instead of just being able to punch this much, if you just come in from both sides, you can punch twice as much. And, you know, it just gives you a real cool pattern that way. So the other thing is, if you want something that has a circle, you have to make sure that when you are cutting your plastic, you don't cut the whole outside of the circle and then cut the things on the inside. Because what will happen is that whole thing is going to fall out. So you have to make sure that you have connectors that will hold everything together that you want to show up. If I wanted just a circle there, I could just cut a round circle. But if I want to have this bit of a pattern in the middle, I need to make sure that I don't maybe like draw something in the middle and draw a circle around it and then cut the middle out. And then when I cut that circle out, the whole thing's going to fall right out. So you have to remember that no matter what you're drawing, you have to make sure that there is not a complete cutout of what you're working on. You have to make sure that parts of that are connected to the outside edge of your stencil. So I needed to make sure that these things were connected all the way around to my stencil. If I had made this little bit, this little swoosh come all the way to here, it might have looked good in my drawing. Let me see if I have my drawing here. Here we go. So here's my drawing. When I drew this, if I had drawn it like this, I might have thought, oh, that looks really good. I like the way that looks. What happens is it starts here and it ends here. This middle part is not connected to anything. So if I cut that all the way, you can see it much better like in the pink. If I had cut it like that, if I had cut that all the way to here, this is going to fall out. That's going to be cut right along there, and that's just going to fall right out. Then I would just have a great big circle right there with nothing else left over. So make sure that you don't make all of your lines connect. There needs to be gaps between your lines. And I still do it to this day. Sometimes I will do something like think, oh, that would look really good if I extend that all the way to there. And then I cut it out and it was like, doggone it. Now, if you do that, you can always reconnect it by putting some tape on here where you know you're not going to get paint, but it will hold that piece back in. So maybe connect it with some tape here. If you're going to connect it with tape, you connect it on this side, turn it over, and connect it on the other side also so that that tape is not sticky and doesn't stick to the paper you're trying to stencil. So once you cut these things out, so these are your stencils, and this is what a stencil looks like. There's also the opposite of a stencil is a mask. And so these are all masks. Now, I don't always keep everything to stencil with, but see now this one, you can go ahead and paint all around it, and there will be no paint where the mask is at. Again, like here. So that one still got paint on it. But I do have a page here. So this is a stencil. Let's see, that's the purple one. So I took my stencil, I put it on my page like this, and I took my sponge with my paint on it, and I filled in all the bare area, and now I stenciled that design right on my paper. The mask, which is the negative of what we just made, when you have large things, the masks work really kind of nice. So the mask looks like this when you use it. So that's the difference between a stencil gives you the design A mask gives you everything but the design, or leaves the design on whatever color paper you have in the background. So here's the mask, and I took the mask and I put it on my paper, and I pounced my paint all over the whole page, and when we removed the mask, then this is what we had left over. So that's the difference between a mask and a stencil. So when you're doing your larger things, you get both. You actually can use the circles and everything. Like I was thinking about actually painting this page right here. And so I'm using the circles as masks. I've got this as a mask, and this, I've got my 2 lines. And so this whole paper will be filled in except for where each of these masks are laying out. So, you know, I thought about maybe doing that at some point in time. So that is, I think that's most of the kind of tips on stenciling that I have for you. Here is, oh, that was the other thing. That's where these come from. All of these except for that one I actually painted. After you have stenciled whatever you're doing, and you've got the paint all over your stencil, you want to wipe it off. So take a wet paper towel, stick it on another piece of paper, and wipe off your stencil. When you're done with the circles, take your wet paper towel and wipe off the stencil. And then the lines. Take your wet paper towel and wipe off the stencil. Now my stencil is clean, but all the paint that was on there with that wet paper towel, it wound up filling in the spaces with a very light bit of color. So don't forget that that paint that's on there, you can still use it by putting something under it as you wipe it off. And then as you wipe, because you need something under it anyways, if you were to put it right on your table, you're going to wind up with paint on your table. So because it's going to go through the stencil and onto whatever's underneath of it. So don't forget to use that paint and collect it up as a lighter copy of what you're doing. So let's just, so if we want to draw a stencil, you just think of something that you want to draw. And I do like to have like some circles and squares and lines. I like the lines for like if you're doing journaling or something. Stenciling those in my book as a place to write. That's kind of a fun thing to do also. But you can just think of a design, or you can just totally wing it and just freehand whatever you want to cut. But let's say we want to cut a circle. Okay, so we're going to cut that circle, and let's do a triangle. And let's just kind of do a wavy line. And then, you know, we want to maybe use all of our plastic. So over here, we'll just do this. Used to know what that was when I was in school. But maybe even just a regular, kind of with a rounded edge straight line. And, you know, you can just go through and just do some patterns. So then you're going to use your cutting board so that you don't cut whatever's underneath your plastic. And when you're cutting, you want to make sure that when you line things up, you're not super close to the holes in your punches if you can. And the thing is, you don't have to put this on here like this with your drawing to make it line up. And let's say this ran into that hole. Be like, oh man, it's in the wrong spot. If it's in the wrong spot, just move it over a little bit. So there we go. Now it's not real super close to the holes, and nothing's really close to any of the edges. So that looks like a good spot to cut those out of. And then just take a little bit of tape and just tape it down. And I'm also going to tape it to my mat. I'm going to, we can do it like I want to see if this will all fit on my mat. Yep. Make sure the mat's underneath of there. Okay. Maybe do one more over here. I don't want to tape it to the table because you want to be able to, at times, turn your cutting mat, because a lot of times that makes it so much easier. Instead of trying to turn your hand or turn the knife, you just turn the mat, especially when doing a circle. So when you're doing a circle, you want to just put your knife on there and just start going around the circle. And when you're cutting, you want to do your best to not have to pick up your knife. So now I'm there. I have to do something, you know. I mean, I'm not going to twist my arm around. I'm just going to turn the mat. Being very careful while you're using the knife, but trying not to pick it up. And if you do pick your knife up, make sure that you get back in exactly the right spot if you're being real particular about how you want something to be cut. Because if you overcut it, and I'll show you what I mean in just a second. I'm going to just continue going. And if you can't see where you started, pick your plastic up a little bit. Okay, so I started right over here because I pretty much want to end where I started. To make sure I have a nice smooth line. Now, I can use this in some other kind of project, putting it on top of a picture or something where you can see through it, but then you still have the color. And or I can use it as a mask. And if you just take a piece of paper, fold it in half, put some masking tape on each side to put all of your little bits in. So there we go. Now we have a circle. Now what I was talking about is you don't want to have an overcut. I'm going to start here at the top of the triangle and just go right straight down. Now, one of two things can happen. I can either just turn my mat and try and turn my knife with really straight lines and such a sharp corner. It's hard to turn your knife without kind of mucking up your corner. So we need to pick it up. But if I go ahead and I cut past that line and come across and then come up here, even though this triangle will fall out, that cut that's over here, paint will get through that little slice that you sliced. And so you'll have your triangle and then a blob of paint sticking out over here. So that's why you want to be really, really careful. So I've turned my cutting mat. I want to find out where the end of that line is, so that that is where I can put the point of my knife. It is right there. So now I know that that point is coming together without cutting too far. So then we're just going to turn this. And I'm going to find out where that slice is, where that cut ends. It ends right there. And then I want to see, where did I start? And there we go. So now we have our triangle. So they're really not as hard as you may think that they might be. And you don't have to stay on exactly the line that you've drawn. If you look at it and think, that could be a little more of an angle, or it could be a little straighter, cut it how you think it needs to be cut. You don't have to stay on your drawn lines. And the light is shining on this plastic for me pretty well, so that I can kind of see where I started and where I need to stop. And if you have it to where it is still attached, I usually hold it up and then just go in from the side each way to get that off, instead of trying to cut it this way, because then I take a chance of slicing out there and leaving a spot that's going to leave a blob of paint. So I'm just going to do this one right here, and then I'm going to just show you how to freehand something. So here we are. Oops, I am off my mat stops right there. So I'm just going to go ahead and, because this is a rounded turn, I am not going to pick up my knife. I'm going to just go ahead and keep going around. Hold your plastic down when you need to. Just making sure that you keep your hands out of the way of where your knife is going to be going. It's better if you kind of hold down as you go when you're doing something long like this, and it just kind of holds things in place. Okay, and I need to come around this end. And I'm not sure where I started. Right there. There's a little bit left, so I'm going to carefully cut that little bit off. Okay, now to me, that will be a fun mask. I will definitely keep that one to use as a mask. So now, instead of following this line to make that little bit, I am just going to, you need to start a hole in your plastic so you can put your scissors in it, because you can't cut in from the edge, or the spot where you cut will let paint seep through it. Now, if you have a spot that you cut and the paint is seeping through it and you don't like it, take a little bit of your tape and cover that spot up. So, but what I'm going to do is, because we were going to have that longer one here with the rounded edges, instead of having to use my knife, I'm going to put a slit that's big enough to fit my scissors in. And then I'm just going to freehand it. I'm going to go that way. I just put lotion on my hands and I can see my fingerprints all over this plastic. And now you want to try and cut as much as you can without, you don't want to do little chops. I'm just going to turn my plastic. It's easier to turn your plastic than to turn your scissors. And there we go. So now we have this. Now when I ended up, I got to here and I was not lined up with where I started, and there was quite a bit. So I just went ahead and I just slowly brought myself back in. So this is on my mask part, but it's not on my stencil. So, and I didn't have just a really sharp, like where I had to just quick cut back in to meet my other line. Also, here where I had made my cut with the knife, there is quite a bit of a jag right there. So I can just go in with my scissors and just straighten it up a little bit if I want to. You don't have to. You need to remember these are your own handmade stencils. They don't need to be perfect. They're not going to be just like anyone else's. And even if you keep your backgrounds and do it again, they won't be exactly the same because they're hand cut. And so they should be very organic. You know, there's nothing wrong with that. So now if you want to do something just freehand, like we did there, but maybe do some shapes, I'm going to just put a cut in our paper big enough to fit my scissors into. And then I'm just going to decide. Now, the one thing I have to remember is that I need to leave connectors in the plastic. So I am just going to just kind of very freehand around. Now, if I were to just continue going and meet up with my line over here, that whole piece is just going to fall right out. So I need to make sure I don't meet up with those lines. And, of course, it's a stencil, so we have to make sure that we take out some of the plastic. You know, that's what we're trying to do here. So I'm going to come up and around. Okay, so this is the piece that I'm cutting out. This little bit right here. Or actually, I should say I'm cutting into the plastic, that piece. So just kind of leaving the same amount. And again, making sure that I don't just come over here. Well, I could do that if I wanted to, and then all I would have, if I were to meet up with that line there, then I would have something that looks just like this. I'm going to cut it off right there. So that's what it's going to look like. But if I want it to be more flowy, I want to make sure that I don't go over there and cut the whole thing out. So now I'm going to just go like this. Okay, now I have to decide where the next bit's going to go. So I'm going to come up here. And I'm just kind of watching where I'm going, thinking about, at this point in time, I'm not connecting any lines. I'm not cutting onto a line that's already been cut. So I know I'm good. But at some point, I am going to need to, I'm going to have to cut out the extra bits. You know, cut out part of it that's going to come out and some of it will stay in. So I have to be careful where I'm going. So at this point in time, let's see what we've got here. We have got this bit is still connected, so long as we don't see it's connected at the bottom right here. So long as I don't make any kind of a cut across here at the bottom, that's definitely going to stay in there. We have this bit here. This is where we started. So I need to be careful to make sure that that stays attached to the larger piece of yellow. We have this piece here, which is the piece that we want to take this out because this bit that goes around it is going to stay in. And I know this can get confusing, but once you mess one up a couple of times, you'll kind of get the idea. I know that sounds terrible, but it is kind of how it works. At least that's how it worked with me. So I'm just going to continue going like this. I'm going to come down here now. Make sure there's my line. I'll make sure that I don't touch that or all of this is falling out, except that one piece that's hooked at the bottom. I'm going to come in like this. And I still haven't crossed any lines, so I know that I haven't cut anything out yet. All right, so now I'm to here. I have all of this very cut up, and I need to figure out now what's coming out and what's staying in. Okay, we started here. If I connect this line, then I'm going to lose this. And if I connect it there, it's going to lose that. All of this is going to fall out if I cut it right there. And this is going to stay in. And that actually looks like that would be a cool pattern. And then this white part that you see, we're going to have a mask that will look like the white part. So I am going to complete that cut to take this piece out. Before I connect any lines, now I could decide to go and do other, maybe put some more up here or whatever. But at this point in time, that's as far as I'm going to go. And I am going to connect the beginning line. There. So now there is our stencil. There. And there is our mask. So cool differences used for different things. So I think that that is really most of the tips that I have for you on how to cut your own stencils and how to use them and how to make your own patterns. So I always do this when I finish a stencil. Sometimes I really don't feel like doing it, but I do it anyways. And the reason is, I'm going to put this mask up there. I don't always do it with masks, but I do it with the stencils. I always paint them so that I have that backing paper to keep between that one and the other one, the next one, and also so that when I'm looking for something that I want to put a stencil on something, I can look through my book and I can look at my actual pages to see what the stencil looks like on paper. It's a really nice way to do it, because sometimes you look at something and think it's going to look one way and it actually looks another. So whenever you're stenciling with a stencil, you want to make sure that you don't put too much paint or ink or whatever it may be on your sponge. These sponges from the Dollar Tree are a different texture than they used to be. They used to be very solid. Now they're very, very light, airy sponge. So the paint comes through it on your hands. But you want to make sure when you're doing a stencil, hold your stencil down. Hold it down where you're stenciling. So we're going to start with this long one. And don't rub, because if you rub, you can rub the paint right underneath the stencil. Straight up and down without too much paint, because if there's a whole lot of paint on your sponge, even if you don't rub, I'm going to move up here because I'm stenciling up here, not way down there. And I don't want it to move. All right, I'm going to hold that down, and I'm going to come over here and I'm going to do this one because it's going to wind up being lighter. I'm going to grab a little bit of that paint off my plastic there. And again, I'm not rubbing on the stencil because I don't want to smear it underneath. And if you have too much paint on your sponge, it's going to smear underneath a little bit anyway. So you want to make sure that you don't have too much paint. So let's see what that looks like. And there we go. You can see here where I started. It's a little bit blobby right there. That's not really the end of my stencil. That really is, that's right where I started. I had more paint on my sponge than I should have, and a little bit of it came out around the end of the stencil. So that's why we have to be very careful. And make sure you get that patted down nice and flat. A lot of times too, I'll pat out next to it before I start, just to make sure I don't have a huge blob on my sponge as I'm stenciling. And again, it doesn't have to be completely, so I'm just going to do this one kind of lightly like that, because you don't have to do it completely dark blue. So that's looking good so far, and we'll do our last one here. Again, holding it down. Now, this one, because this is going to want to lift up as we put paint on it, very possibly. And so you do want to kind of hold down by where you're stenciling and move your hand as you go. I'm going to do this one just lightly also. And if I see that my stencil is really moving at all, then I'm going to move my hand to that area to hold it down. Nope, I just moved the whole thing as I was trying to move my hand. There we go. And kind of hold it here. And you can use a sponge. You can use, if you use a paintbrush, they're not the best for painting with stencils, because definitely a paintbrush wants to push it underneath the stencil. Unless you have a stenciling brush, and that is a paintbrush with a, they're normally You know, they come in little, like the size of a dime up to the size of, well, I've seen really large ones too, but they are completely flat on top, a very hard bristle and very flat on the end that you're going to put in your paint. That's a stenciling brush, and that is so, or a stippling brush, that is so that you can tap the brush onto your, whatever you're painting, straight down, just like we're doing with this sponge. So we are almost out of paint, but we'll be able to finish this because we're just putting it on lightly. And next week we're going to pick up some gloves, so if you're using your little things and don't want to get the paint on your hands, we'll have some gloves for that. So let's see what this looks like. And there we go. Looks like a path going somewhere. But I think that, you know, stencils are just really fun to use. And, you know, you can make flowers. Flowers. I'm not going to cut one, but I am going to show you how to cut a flower because it does make a difference. First things first. Let's wipe off this stencil so that we can put it away. Grab a paper towel. It's not really that wet. It's just that spray comes out so fine. And then I'm just going to wipe this off. And again, you need to hold it as you're doing it. And it works best if you do it right after you have painted, like this paint is already drying on here, which it will come off because this is plastic, but it doesn't give me as nice of a, doesn't give me as much of a painty look. And of course, when you're doing something like this, these are harder to wipe them off and get the exact design on your paper because of the fact that, you know, they're going to move so much. But you can kind of get a little bit on there. Because it kind of dried, now we've got little bits of paint on there. But this is just a fun background or card or whatever to use. So I'm going to finish wiping that off just a little bit. I'm wiping off the dry bits, really. Wiping them onto my mat. And I can put my stencil away. And then make sure you take those dry bits and put them somewhere. There we go. Okay, a flower, really quickly. When you're doing a flower, so you have a flower. With the circle in the middle, maybe even some little circles inside there. Okay, if you cut this like this, that whole thing's going to fall right out of your page. You're just going to have this big blob, kind of like a cloud or something. So what you need to do when you're doing a flower is you need to make individual petals like this, so that when you cut it out, this part falls out of your plastic and the rest stays in the plastic. And you can go in and, you know, do a circle in the middle. But you want to make sure that you leave a little bit there. Now, sometimes what I'll do after I get my flower pattern done, I'll go in and I will draw around my flower like this. And then I will cut that out. So I will have a big blob, and I will have one that is all individual petals and a center. And so then I will do the back blob one color, and then I will take the petal part and set it on top. I don't know if I can do this quick enough or not, but we're gonna try so that you can kind of see what I mean. Now, this is not, I would normally draw my flower a little nicer than that, but we're gonna do with what we have for now. And so what you'll have is, oh, wait a minute, that's not gonna work. Excuse me. I need the flower on the cutting board. Okay. You do have to do the petals first. Don't cut the blob out first. Okay, so we're just going to, and again, this is going to be very rough, but if you take your time doing this, they turn out really pretty. And then you wind up having a layered flower as far as your painting goes, or your stencil or inking, and it looks really pretty. Okay, so there's one petal. And I should have done one with not quite as many petals, but we're just going to work with it really quickly. And I'm trying to stop before I get down towards the center because I do want to put a little circle in the middle. And don't forget, cool things to keep. I really like the like raindrop shapes. Oops. Oh, I really messed that one up. I came way out here. That's not good, but we're just gonna continue, and I'll have to take that off. And I'll show you why, hopefully, when we're done. That's where I was talking about an overcut. You don't want an overcut, and that's what that was. But do be very careful making sure you keep your hands away from the blade. That's the most important thing. And again, this isn't perfect, but no flowers are. Again, making sure that where I'm cutting is not touching where I've already cut. Here. One more petal. Okay, trying to pull that out. Do not pull it out, cut it. You can really make a mess, or you can rip your whole stencil trying to pull it out. I have done that before. Try not to lift your knife. Now I need to find out where I left off, right there. Okay. And I do these on the same stencil. Hopefully I'm going to have room on here. I think I am. Because then you have them together. All right, now normally I would cut a little circle in the middle. But I'm going to see if I can just get my hole punch in here and just put a little circle in the middle. Hopefully not. There we go. Okay. All right, now if you stencil it, it's going to look just like that, which is cute. But you can also then try and get that stuff out of my way. This is my same flower that we just did. So we're going to do that again over here. And we're going to go around the outside of it. right, so here we go. And then I'm going to show you why I said, remember I said don't just draw a flower and cut around the outside, because you're going to see what this looks like. I need to find out where I picked my knife up at. Right there. Yeah. Keep my hand out of the way. Need to make sure that I'm not cutting where I already cut the petals. I am holding my plastic down, but not trying to keep my hands away from the knife. Do watch that. And you really should never cut fast like this. Well, like it's not really that fast, but it's faster than you should cut. Always be careful and mindful of what you're doing. So there we go. I'm still hooked here, over here. There. Okay, so now we have our flower to make in 3D. But see what a blob that is? And just cut around something. Any detail that you were going to cut in the middle is gone. But it's fun too. Ooh, do I have any? I'm going to use, just for the sake of time, because I have some here, I'm going to quick use these inks because I don't have two colors of paint here, and we don't want to wait for that paint to dry. And of course, you know, this is not going to be the best, but I want to show you how it works to do a layered flower. Okay, so there's our outside or our backing. That's what that looks like. So it doesn't look that much like a flower, but then when we take our flower, and the one thing that you do have to do is, and what I normally do is, okay, so this is like, I mark one of the petals, and then that is also this petal. So that, you know where to line it up at. So we're just gonna line that up on the inside, and have like a purple or a blue, something of a different color. Here we go. Well, we're just gonna use this one. And so thank you very much, everyone, for stopping by. I'm afraid that we may run out of time here. If you get a chance, leave a comment, give a thumbs up. I really do appreciate it. Watch a commercial. And if you want to make sure you don't miss any videos, hit the bell. That will remind you whenever I put up a video. So there is what our flower looks like when you layer it. Now, it looks kind of bad with all of the squares on the pink, but it still is very cool. And then they're really fun to just kind of draw around with the messy lines, and that really makes it fun too. So, but again, I really do appreciate it. I hope that if you try some stencils that you have fun. Be careful with the knife. Remember, your stencils don't need to be perfect. They need to be you, unique, not anybody else. And not for any reason but the fact that you had fun making them and you had fun using them. So, thank you again for stopping by. I really do appreciate you. And I hope that each and every one of you has an outstanding day. Bye-bye.